There's something deeply unsettling about a place designed to make you laugh. Sitting silent, rusting, with the rides still there and nobody on them. No cotton candy smell, no screaming kids, no Wurlitzer playing from a clown booth, just weeds, graffiti, and the outline of something that used to be loud. Today, we're looking at 15 abandoned amusement parks still standing across the U.S. park. 15. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, Rock, West Virginia. If there's one park on this list that earns the phrase, "It was doomed from the beginning," it's Lake Shawnee. The land itself has a documented history that goes back centuries. Long before any carnival ride was ever bolted into place here, archaeologists confirmed that the area served as a Native American burial ground. Then, in 1783, Mitchell Clay, a settler who had established an 800-acre farm on the property, lost two of his children, Bartley and Tabitha, to a raid by members of the Shawnee tribe while he was away. A third child, Ezekiel, was taken captive and later burned at the stake. Clay retaliated in what became known as the Clover Bottom Massacre. About 140 years after all that, entrepreneur Conley Snido decided this was a great spot for a swing set and a Ferris wheel. You can probably see where this is going. Snido opened the park in the 1920s with a Ferris wheel, circular swings, a swimming hole, a dance hall, and overnight cabins. For a while, it functioned as a genuine summer destination. Then the accident started. A young girl was struck and killed by a delivery truck while riding the swing set. A boy drowned in the pool. The park failed a health inspection and closed in 1966. It sat abandoned until the 1980s when a man named Gaylord White bought it with plans to develop the land into residential housing. His construction crews broke ground and almost immediately hit Native American burial sites and skeletal remains, most of them children. White stopped construction, kept the land, briefly reopened the park in the mid-1980s for about 3 years, and then closed it again due to insurance concerns. Today, the rusting Ferris wheel and the swing set still stand, surrounded by overgrown vegetation just where they were left. The property offers tours by appointment and hosts the annual Dark Carnival event each fall. The Mercer County Convention and Visitors Bureau describes it simply as one of the world's most haunted places. They're not exactly wrong. Park 14, Chippewa Lake Park, Medina County, Ohio. Chippewa Lake Park had one of the more dignified runs of any regional amusement park in the country. It opened in 1878 and operated for exactly 100 years before closing in 1978, quietly, with no media fanfare, no announcement, no farewell season. The gates just didn't open the following year. At its height, Chippewa Lake was a genuine Midwestern institution. Families arrived by train and by car from across northeastern Ohio. The park featured a wooden roller coaster designed by Fred Pierce, flying cages, a Ferris wheel, a carousel, a tumble-bug ride, and a ballroom where big bands performed 7 nights a week during the summer season. It was the kind of place where your grandparents met on a Saturday night and your parents went every summer for 20 years. Then Cedar Point, about an hour north, grew into one of the greatest amusement parks on Earth. Googa Lake expanded aggressively, and Little Chippewa Lake simply couldn't compete. Continental Business Enterprises bought it in 1969, with grand plans to transform it into a resort. Those plans went nowhere. The park closed after its centennial season and was left exactly as it was. For decades, the rides just sat there. Trees grew through the frame of the Ferris wheel. The Big Dipper wooden coaster finally rotted enough to be demolished in 2010. The ballroom burned down in 2002. As of June 2024, the Ferris wheel frame, the Little Dipper, flying cages, and the Tumblebug were still standing. Medina County purchased the property in 2020 with plans to convert it into a public nature park, with the rusted Ferris wheel preserved as a historical monument. Construction is underway, and the first phase of public access was set to open in spring 2026. So this one is in the final stretch of its time as an abandoned place. See it while you still can. Park 13, Joyland Amusement Park, Wichita, Kansas. Lester Ottaway founded Joyland on June 12, 1949, and the thing that started it all wasn't a roller coaster or a carousel. It was a miniature steam locomotive. Herb Ottaway, Lester's son, had been refurbishing a 12-inch gauge steam train since the early 1930s and taking it to county fairs across Kansas and Colorado. The idea was simple: give the train a permanent home. Everything else followed. For 55 years, Joyland was the largest amusement park in central Kansas. At its peak, it had 24 rides, including the famous wooden roller coaster built by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company in 1949, an 80-foot-tall, 2,600-foot track machine. There was also the Wacky Shack Dark Ride, the Log Jam, a sky coaster, and Louie the Clown, an animatronic figure who sat at a Wurlitzer organ at the park entrance, playing music to greet every single visitor for decades. In April 2004, a 13-year-old girl fell more than 30 feet from the Ferris wheel, suffering serious injuries. Federal safety investigations followed, financial troubles mounted, and after an unsuccessful 2006 attempt to reopen under a Seattle-based company, Joyland closed for good. Vandalism, theft, and fires came next. The roller coaster was destroyed in a windstorm in April 2015 and dismantled shortly after. The Wacky Shack burned in 2018. The property sold at auction in November 2018 for $198,000. Former visitor Jolene Patton remembered the roller coaster this way. "I went there many times as a kid. I remember being scared out of my wits the first time I rode the coaster going up that hill. It was so much fun, I ran right back around to get in line again." Most of Joyland's physical structures are gone now, but the site still stands, still scraped and scarred, still wearing the outline of a park that fed generations of Wichita summers. The carousel, saved by a donation to Botanica Gardens and fully restored by 2019, is the most intact piece of Joyland left. At least something made it out. Park 12, Williams Grove Amusement Park, Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Williams Grove started small. In the 1850s, it was a picnic ground, the kind of shaded summer spot that Pennsylvania towns produced by the dozen in the 19th century. By 1928, the Williams family had started adding rides. By 1933, they had built the Cyclone, a wooden roller coaster that would become the park's crown jewel and eventually the last thing standing. The park ran for over 150 years under various forms of ownership. Hurricane Agnes hit in 1972, flooding and damaging the property, and tenacious owner Morgan Hughes spent years repairing it and keeping things going. But by 2005, Hughes decided to step back, channeling his energy into the adjacent speedway he also owned. Williams Grove Amusement Park closed, and the Cyclone, the great wooden coaster that had been screaming through that Pennsylvania valley for more than 7 decades, the park grounds have been used for events over the years, including a dinosaur drive-through display of life-size animatronic prehistoric creatures. It's one of the older surviving wooden coaster structures in the country, even in its current state, a fact that enthusiasts visit specifically to observe and mourn. There is something particularly melancholy about a roller coaster that just stopped. No dramatic final season, no tearful farewell, just the chain lift going quiet one fall and never starting up again in spring. Park 11, Heritage USA, Fort Mill, South Carolina. This one requires a bit of context because Heritage USA wasn't just an amusement park, it was a full-scale religious theme park and resort built by televangelist Jim Bakker and his PTL organization in the 1970s and 80s. At its peak, Heritage USA was the third most visited theme park in the United States, drawing more than 6 million visitors a year. The 2,300-acre property included hotels, a water park, an amphitheater, a shopping street called Main Street USA, a 21-story luxury hotel called the Heritage Grand Towers, and a variety of biblical and family-themed attractions. It was big, ambitious, and deeply strange. In 1987, the whole thing collapsed, and we mean that somewhat literally. Bakker was embroiled in a sex scandal involving church secretary Jessica Hahn, then indicted for fraud and conspiracy after it came out that he had overseen the sale of roughly $158 million in fraudulent vacation partnerships. He was convicted in 1989 and sentenced to 45 years in prison, later reduced. He served 5 years. Without Bakker and PTL, Heritage USA fell apart almost immediately. The half-finished 21-story Heritage Grand Towers Hotel became one of the most iconic abandoned structures in the South. A massive concrete shell visible from the road, surrounded by overgrown grounds and the slowly disintegrating remains of a park that once welcomed millions. Some buildings have since been reclaimed or demolished, but large sections of the property, including the tower's shell, remain standing as a monument to one of the more spectacular collapses of the 1980s. What makes Heritage USA unusual as an abandoned site isn't the scale, though the scale is extraordinary. It's the specific weirdness of watching a place built around ideas of faith, family, and salvation slowly fall to pieces. The water park features remain. The amphitheater still exists in some form. The street-level infrastructure of what was supposed to be a permanent Christian destination community sits there, slowly being eaten by South Carolina vegetation. Bakker, after his release from prison, eventually resumed his ministry elsewhere. The park he built didn't follow him. Park 10, Dogpatch, USA, Newton County, Arkansas. If you grew up reading the comics pages in the 1960s, you probably know Lil Abner, Al Cap's long-running satirical newspaper strip set in the fictional backwoods town of Dogpatch. Somebody in Arkansas decided that was a great idea for a theme park. Dogpatch USA opened in 1968 in the Ozark Mountains of Newton County, built around the Lil Abner characters with costume staff, themed rides, and Ozark Mountain scenery that genuinely fit the comic strip aesthetic. It was, by the standards of regional parks, a reasonably successful operation for more than 2 decades. At its peak, it drew around 400,000 visitors a season. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, attendance had slipped badly. Lil Abner as a cultural reference was fading fast. The strip had ended in 1977, and a theme park whose entire premise depended on people recognizing the source material was in serious trouble. Dogpatch USA closed in 1993. The remains sit in the Ozark Hills today. Skeletal ride structures, overgrown walkways, and the bones of a park that predicated its entire existence on a comic strip that most people under 50 have never read. The natural setting remains beautiful. The park itself looks like a fever dream. Park 9, Conneaut Lake Park, Conneaut Lake, Pennsylvania. Conneaut Lake Park is one of the oldest amusement parks in the country. It traces its origins to 1892, which means it was already old when World War II started. It still operates today, barely intermittently, and with an extremely complicated history, but large sections of it have sat neglected for years, and it belongs on this list because of the question mark that hangs over it. The park's signature ride is the Blue Streak, a wooden roller coaster built in 1938 that is considered one of the finest surviving examples of classic wooden coaster construction. The blue streak has been running on and off as the park's finances have lurched through decades of ownership battles, tax problems, and near-closure events. It's been saved by community fundraising, by nonprofit intervention, and by the sheer stubbornness of people who refuse to let it go. Much of the surrounding park infrastructure is in various stages of abandonment. The Hotel Kano, a grand Victorian structure that once welcomed guests from across western Pennsylvania and Ohio, has stood largely vacant for years, its condition declining with each season. The midway sections that haven't been maintained are overgrown and collapsing. Whether Connaught Lake Park survives in any meaningful form depends largely on whoever holds its fate in any given season. But the blue streak is still there, and for a certain kind of person, that's reason enough to make the drive. Park 8, Miracle Strip Amusement Park, Panama City Beach, Florida. Panama City Beach was, for generations, the spring break capital of the Gulf Coast and a summer magnet for Southern families. Miracle Strip Amusement Park opened in 1963 and ran for 4 decades as one of the most beloved regional parks in Florida. It had a log flume, a classic haunted house, a wooden roller coaster loved by anyone who ever rode it, and the general atmosphere of a 1960s seaside park that just never bothered to update its aesthetic. The Starliner ran for 37 years before the park closed in 2004. A victim of rising real estate values in Panama City Beach and declining interest in mid-century park experiences. The land was redeveloped, and the Starliner was dismantled and sold. Here's where it gets interesting. The park's signature Haunted Castle Dark Ride, a clattering fog machine and skeleton affair that had been terrifying and delighting children since the park's early days, was purchased and relocated. Various rides and pieces were scattered across new owners, but the site itself, including some structures and remnants, lingered for years. An adjacent area, sometimes called Miracle Strip at Pier Park, later carried forward some of the park's spirit with restored elements. Former visitors have described the original Miracle Strip with the kind of loyalty usually reserved for childhood homes. There was nothing fancy about it, one former regular noted, but everybody who grew up along that coast went there. The Starliner's story has a small, happy ending. The classic wooden coaster was purchased after the park closed, transported, and found a new home at the Cypress Gardens Adventure Park in Winter Haven, Florida, where it ran under a new name. The Haunted Castle similarly found preservation through relocation. The ride survived. It was the park. The specific combination of seaside air, faded paint, and 4 decades of family memories that couldn't be moved anywhere. Park 7, Idora Park, Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio has had a rough century. The collapse of the steel industry hit the city harder than almost anywhere else in America, and Idora Park, a beloved regional amusement park that opened in 1899, is in many ways the story of Youngstown itself. At its peak, Idora was a genuine destination, drawing large crowds to its wooden roller coasters, dance hall, swimming pool, and the relaxed lakeside atmosphere that made it a regional institution. In 1984, a fire started in the Midway area and tore through the park, destroying the roller coasters and most of the concession stands. Idora managed one final season after the fire, then closed in September 1984 for good. The land sat neglected for years. Structures were demolished piecemeal. Vandalism and arson visits came regularly. Today, very little of the park's physical structure remains above ground, but the property still carries that particular weight of a place that once mattered enormously to a community and was then simply left behind. Former Idora employees held reunions for years after the park closed, gathering at the site on anniversaries to share photographs and memories. Canfield Township hosted an Idora Park Experience event in 2018, bringing together artifacts donated by former visitors. The nostalgia has simply never gone away. There is something specifically Youngstown about Idora's story. The city watched its steel mills go dark in the 1970s and 80s in a series of closures that devastated the local economy and population. Idora Park closed in that same era as part of the same broader unwinding. When people talk about Youngstown, they're often talking about loss on a large scale: economic, social, structural. Idora is part of that story. Not the biggest part, but one of the most visible. A park that was joyful, crowded, and alive, and then wasn't, in the same years that the city itself went through its hardest chapter. Park 6, Santa's Village, Jefferson, New Hampshire. There were once multiple Santa's Village parks across the Northeast, built during the post-war era to capitalize on the enormous appetite for family entertainment that came with the baby boom. The Jefferson, New Hampshire location was part of this network and opened in 1953. For decades, it was a fixture of New England summer travel, a North Pole-themed park built into the White Mountains, complete with rides, costumed elves, animatronic scenes, and Santa himself available for photos. By the early 2000s, the original concept had worn out its commercial viability. The ownership closed the location, and the park sat rusting in the New Hampshire hills, Christmas decorations fading, animatronic figures staring blankly at no one, the rides going still. Here's the twist. After years of abandonment, a new ownership group acquired the property and actually reopened it in 2013. It operates today as a seasonal attraction, though it bears almost no resemblance to what it once was. But before that reopening, the photographs of the abandoned park, empty workshops, lifeless animatronic elves, deflated holiday cheer everywhere, spread widely across the internet and became something of a touchstone for anyone who finds abandoned places compelling. A cheerful theme park left to rot is disturbing enough. A Christmas-themed one is somehow much worse. Park 5, Enchanted Forest, Turner, Oregon. Opening in 1971, Enchanted Forest was the creation of Roger Toft, a man who spent 7 years building the park, largely by himself, with no professional construction background and very little money. He carved, sculpted, and constructed fairy tale-themed scenes along a forested hillside south of Salem, Oregon, eventually opening to the public after nearly a decade of solo labor. The park was never large. It was always a small, handmade, distinctly homegrown operation that relied on Tofty's personal vision and constant maintenance. It's still technically in operation today, though sections of it have fallen into disrepair and its future has been uncertain for years. The genuine original structures Tofte built, the storybook houses, the carved wooden figures, the crooked old witch's shoe, give the park the quality of something that shouldn't exist at all. A fairy tale environment that one man hammered and painted into being through sheer stubbornness. Whether it survives long-term depends on investment and restoration that has been slow in coming. Sections of the park that haven't been maintained have taken on exactly the quality you'd expect from a fairy tale park, slowly losing its fight against the Pacific Northwest weather. Mossy, dark, and considerably more Brothers Grimm than Disney. Park 4, Playland Park, San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio's Playland Park operated for more than 50 years before it finally closed in 1980. For much of that time, it was the largest amusement park in South Texas, a regional institution that served generations of families who came for the roller coasters, the arcade, and the swimming pool. After its closure, the land was acquired and the park infrastructure sat in various states of abandonment for years. Fires, vandalism, and simple neglect took their toll on the structures that remained. Unlike some parks on this list, Playland didn't achieve widespread national recognition as an abandoned site, but for the people of San Antonio who grew up going there, the loss was about as personal as these things get. A portion of the former park land eventually became part of a commercial development, and the entry sign remained standing for years, gutted and weathered, covered in new plant growth as one of the last recognizable remnants of the park's presence. Park 3, Rose Island, Charlestown, Indiana. Rose Island is the park on this list with perhaps the most complete and final story. Developed by businessman David Rose in 1923 along the Ohio River in Indiana, it was accessible by automobile, by ferry, or by steamboat from ports as far as Louisville and Madison. At its height, it had roller coasters, a dance hall, a zoo, a swimming pool, and a Ferris wheel with views of the Ohio River that visitors apparently never got tired of. On January 27, 1937, the Ohio River flooded. The flood that swept through the Ohio Valley that winter was one of the worst natural disasters in American history, devastating communities across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Rose Island took a direct hit. The flooding was extensive, the damage catastrophic. When the water receded, what was left wasn't a park anymore. It was wreckage. Rose Island never reopened. The land eventually became part of Charlestown State Park, and the ruins, foundations, concrete structures, fragments of what was, are still visible today, slowly being reclaimed by the hillside forest above the river. Visitors could arrive by automobile, ferry, or even one of the regular steamboat trips offered from ports in Louisville. Noted one historical account capturing what was a genuinely different era of leisure travel. All of that erased in a single winter flood. Part 2, Holy Land, USA, Waterbury, Connecticut. Holy Land, USA is one of the stranger entries on this list, and that's saying something, considering we've already covered a Nazi compound in Los Angeles and an amusement park built on a Native American burial ground. John Baptist Greco, a local lawyer and devout Catholic, began building Holy Land, USA in 1955 on a hillside overlooking Waterbury. The 18-acre park featured scale models of biblical sites, a miniature Jerusalem, a replica of the nativity scene, and various religious tableaus spread across the wooded hillside. A large illuminated cross on the crest of the hill became one of the most recognizable landmarks in the city, visible from the highway below. At its peak in the 1960s, Holy Land, USA drew up to 40,000 visitors a season. Greco ran it himself with volunteer assistance, charging no admission. When his health declined, he closed the park in 1984 and turned the property over to a group of nuns who intended to restore it. Restoration never happened. Greco died in 1986. For decades, the site sat abandoned on the hillside, the biblical dioramas deteriorating, the paint flaking, the statues crumbling, the steel cross rusting. The park acquired an extremely dark notoriety in 2010 when a young woman was murdered on the grounds. Sporadic restoration efforts have continued since then. A new lighted cross was installed in 2013 as part of a renewed drive to restore the site. As of recent years, the property is still largely in ruins, with occasional progress being made on individual elements. The cross on the hill still shines at night over Waterbury, which is perhaps the most persistent thing about Holy Land, USA. It keeps trying. Park 1, Nara Dreamland, California's Ghost, an American Parallel. For our final entry, we're stepping slightly sideways, not to a US park, but to the most American story that ever happened on foreign soil. Nara Dreamland opened in Japan in 1961, explicitly modeled after Disneyland, right down to the castle, the main street, and the layout of the grounds. Walt Disney himself declined to partner on the project, so the Japanese developers simply built their own version without him. The park operated until 2006, when attendance had fallen too low to justify operation. When it closed, it was left almost entirely intact. The roller coasters stayed, the castle stayed, the Haunted Mansion-style ride stayed, everything just stopped. Why include it here? Because no country in the world has produced more abandoned amusement parks than the United States, and no concept has traveled further, meant more, or been mourned more loudly than the American idea of the amusement park, the mid-century dream of a place set apart from ordinary life, built purely for pleasure, accessible to everyone, designed to make you feel, even briefly, like the world was simpler and better than you knew it was. Every park on this list carried that promise, and then had to let it go. The rides stopped, the lights went out, the cotton candy smell faded. but the concrete and the steel stayed behind, holding the shape of something people once drove hours to reach, paid their last few dollars to enter, and came back to summer after summer until one season they didn't. 15 parks, 15 stories of something that was fully alive and then wasn't. From a hillside in Connecticut to the Ozark Mountains, from an Ohio lakefront to the swamps of South Carolina, the footprints of America's abandoned amusement parks are everywhere if you know where to look. Some of them are being cleaned up and repurposed. Some are still just sitting there, waiting to see what happens next. And a few, if you happen to be driving by on the right highway, are still visible right through the car window, rusting silhouettes on the horizon, unmistakably what they used to be. If this kind of history is your thing, hit the like button and subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'll see you in the next one.